June 3 is much closer than we could have imagined. Denis Villeneuve recently announced that the return to the world of Frank Herbert will occur a year earlier than planned. Besides, the fourth part is already at an early stage of development, and for it they found another director today. We will tell the latest news from the House of Atreides. We will discuss the change of production team and further plans for the development of the franchise. Get comfortable because it will be interesting as always. Let's start with the fact that between the second and third part of the Dune, according to the original plan, we were waiting for a big break. The fact is that Denis Villeneuve said that he wants to take a break in working on science fiction and do another project, and after that, with renewed vigor, to plunge into the continuation of the story of the Sex Atreides. But just the other day, the director confirmed that he had changed his mind about the success of the second film along with good reviews and audience. Knowledge showed that the interest in the Dunes does not subside, so Villeneuve feels responsible to fans and does not want to stretch the trilogy for many years. So, by the way, he is very grateful to them. I agree with new reports from insiders. The shooting of the third part with the subtitle Messiah can begin this summer, which means that the Dune Atreides movie will be released somewhere in 2026. But this is unconfirmed information because Villeneuve in a recent interview shared his thoughts on working on the third part and mentioned that the script is not yet ready. It requires special attention to detail and understanding of the philosophical topics embedded in. The director noted that the Dune mission is a darker and more complex story than the first book. It focuses on the consequences of the actions of Paul Atreides and how his decision affects the universe. Boyes Villeneuve admitted that he was inspired by the opportunities to explore the themes of the power of religion and morality that make this book so unique. But he also stressed that adapting the second book is a kind of challenge. The work is filled with internal conflicts and reflections that are difficult to transfer to the screen. Director noted that his goal is to preserve the depth of the original while making the story accessible to a wide audience. This is what requires careful work on the script so that every element of the film, from dialogue to visual effects, conveys the essence of the book. So while the fact that the shooting will begin in the summer, I can hardly believe Villeneuve also mentioned that it is important for him to maintain continuity between films. He wants the mission to be a logical continuation of the first two parts, developing characters and storylines that were laid earlier. This includes further exploration of the relationship between Gender and Charnia, as well as the fate of the Iraqis' inhabitants. The plot will be based on the second book of the cycle, which tells about the consequences of the rise of Gender from Radish to power. The story becomes darker and philosophical, diving deeper into the themes of power and religion. This promises to make the film not only spectacular but also more dramatic by the time the third film begins. Atreides no longer just foresees the future, he is the emperor of the universe. He has loyal followers of Aframa support his war, which leads to the death of billions of people, while Gender tries to prevent the destruction of all mankind while avoiding assassinations by embittered royal houses who envy his power. Meanwhile, things are not smooth in the family either. At the end of the second film, it was announced that Princess Irulan would become his wife because it was the only way to stay on the throne. She opposes him and even tries to prevent Charna from giving birth to an heir to him, since Gender does not allow and Ruland to bear his children. Despite the fact that in the second part of the Granny's India decides to leave her lover, it will not be forever. This moment becomes an important turn in her story and is needed to show her independence and disagreement with the way Atreides manipulates her people. Her departure on a sandworm symbolizes not only the physical but also the emotional state between her and the sex. However, in the third film, Zendaya will receive much more screen time than in the previous part. Because Chaniz plays a more significant role, her character becomes key in the development of the plot and the arch from Rydis, so we will watch her much more often. Also, in an interview, Villeneuve touched on the topic of a time jump that will take place in the sequel. Frank Herbert's book between the events of the first and second parts takes about 12 years, which means that the creators of the tape will have to take into account the age of the actors and at the same time maintain the integrity of the story. The director admitted that the time jump is an important element of the plot that cannot be ignored. In the mission of the Dune, Atreides is no longer a young man but an experienced ruler who faces the consequences of his decisions. This requires a more mature approach to the character that Timothée Chalamet should take into account in the new incarnation. Director noted that he is confident that the actor will be able to convey the age and depth of the protagonist of the saga, despite the fact that the real-time interval between shooting films will be less than in the book. But at the same time, it became known that the production team is considering various options in order to organically fit the time jump into the film. Vec is certainly not about replacing actors, but rather involves using makeup visual effects, or even changing some plot elements to make the transition smoother. The main goal of the creators is to preserve the emotional component of the story, even if it will have to adapt and change some details. Despite the fact that work on the script has already begun, Villeneuve stressed that the project is still in its early stages. He did not name specific dates for the start of filming or the release of the film, noting that it is important to devote enough time to preparation to create a worthy sequel. In general, the director's comments inspire optimism in fans of the Dune. His approach to adaptation demonstrates respect for the source material and the desire to create a film that will not only be spectacular but also deep. Director recommended himself as a master of large-scale cinema, and his return suggests that the tape will retain visual power. But despite the optimistic news about the start of filming, there is no official confirmation from the studio. The start date of production can be changed, especially given the difficulties associated with the schedules of actors and preparation for such a large-scale project. By the way, Denis Villeneuve has long stated that the third Dune will remain the last film in the franchise on which he is working. Although this could easily be attributed to the fact that the director just wants to work on other projects, in fact, it speaks to the complex nature of Frank Herbert's sequels. The Dune mission book is the end of the storyline of Flora Atreides, and the next part is already called Children of the Dune. And the story becomes more complex, and in the center there are other characters, which indicates the difficulties of adapting the film. At the time of the release of the fourth book, the plot follows the son of Paul, the Emperor of Summer II, who merged with cave worms, becoming a colossal creature. This is not only difficult to visualize but also contains narrative problems, since much of the story involves an underlying philosophy that is not suitable for Hollywood blockbusters. Each subsequent sequel also jumps further and further into the future, which makes it difficult to track events as thousands of years pass, but recently it became known that WB has already found a director for the fourth part. At this place, they want to see Gareth Edwards. Information about this appeared simultaneously from several sources, so most likely is reliable Edward, with a good candidacy behind his back. Modern Godzilla, one of the best films on Star Wars Rogue One, good sci-fi creator, and the coming world of the Jurassic Renaissance. I think that Villeneuve immediately announced that he would remove only the trilogy. Replacement options have been considered for several years. Edwards proved that he can create epic scenes, think through dialogues and plot, and also knows what the viewer will like, so he will probably cope with the task himself. He has not commented on this information yet, but for us it means that the break between the third and fourth films is expected to be minimal. It will be interesting to see how the following books will eventually adapt, given all the difficulties indicated, except that the Dune universe expands on the small screen. Epic joke Prophecy, telling about the origin of the Order of Ben and Gesserit, will continue in the second season. HBO Max announced it immediately after the completion of the first series received low-key reviews from viewers, but critics gave it a solid 70% freshness on Tomatoes. Prophecy tries to follow in the footsteps of other HBO hits like Game of Thrones and its prequels. Given the abundance of events that can be shown in the project, no one doubts that Prophecy is unlikely to become a one-off miniseries. And throughout the history of the first season, it was clear that the authors are trying to turn the project into the next epic franchise. Talk that the second season will receive a significantly larger budget, so that in scope he could compete with the House of the Dragon and the Rings of Power. By the way, and those who watched, write in the comments, how do you like the Dune of Prophecy, and whether it is deservedly called the spiritual successor of Thrones. As you can see, the franchise is doing in full order. Many believe that the third Dune can come out in December of the 26th year because the studio has a slot for the rental of the film. However, given that her script is not yet ready, this probability is too optimistic. Most likely at this time will be released Mandalorian and Horns or the next Star Wars. In any case, we are waiting for the official announcement of the start date of filming, but for today it's all, friends. See you in new videos very soon.